Hi, everybody. Welcome to Reader's Intrigue, where authors are going to read the first chapter of their book so that we can be intrigued and maybe find a new book to read. Get comfy, get cozy. Let's listen.
Hello, my name is Kim Lengling, and I am an author, a podcaster of the Let Fear Bounce podcast. I'm also the host of The Right Stuff, WRITE, The Right Stuff, the Author's Voice television show. It's an online streaming show currently with new episodes up right now on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, Google Play, and many other platforms. So that's just a little bit about me. I'm also an avid reader, a voracious reader. I love to read all the time. I am a coffee drinker, a dog lover. I have a rescue dog named Dexter, and you will regularly find me outside, walking around with my dog out in the fields and out in the woods, talking to the critters. So that's just a little bit about me. The book I'd like to share with you today is called When Grace Found Me, Volume 3. It is the third book in a 3-book series, and it is of women of faith from around the world have shared their stories of going through trials, struggles, life, just simply going through the tough spots in life and how they got through it by the grace of God. It is a faith-based book, but their stories are just so inspiring and encouraging. And in the 3 volumes, there is a little over 50 women from all over the world that opened up their hearts and had the courage to share their personal stories in the hopes that they would help someone else, and also in the hopes that their stories will land in exactly the hands that they are meant to land in. Now I have a story in each volume. I'm going to share a chapter of this one, When Grace Found Me, Volume 3. And this is my story, and it's called Just a Brick. So I will share that with you now. First, I have to put my glasses on because I can't see. Just a brick. Years ago, I found myself sporadically attending church, and I didn't consider myself a Christian. In hindsight, I know now that I was seeking something, but I had no idea what it was at the time. And when I did attend a service, I didn't understand much of what I heard. The sermons and the stories were confusing to me. And so each time I would attend, I would leave feeling confused and even angry, carrying a chip on my shoulder as I walked out the door. This was no one's fault but my own. I can see that now, but back then, my goodness, I would ask myself why I was wasting my time attending church. I would have this running monologue in my head. Who is that guy up front talking about Jesus and letting it go and giving it up to God? And what does any of that even mean? And those singers up there, I think they're up there putting on a show. No one I know acts like that in church. Who throws their hands in the air for Jesus? And who cries because of a song that they're singing? Round and round, those thoughts would circle in my mind. And yet I found myself going back to that small red brick church with the pretty stained glass windows. Not every Sunday, but when I went to church, that was the one that I would go to. Now, the windows of that small church, they were my favorite part. Not the pastor, not the people or the sermons, but those stained glass windows. When the sun would stream through with the colors casting a ray across the pews, it felt as if there was a presence there, one not of this world. It was comforting. I wasn't certain what it was that I was feeling, but it did not cause me to be anxious or fearful in any way. I often wondered if anyone else noticed the amazing beauty in the sun's rays shining through the air. Did they notice the tiny dust particles floating and dancing within those rays of sun? Did anyone else notice the smell of this church, that old book smell, one that reminds you of a library and makes you want to stay, to sit and be still with the quiet? Was I the only one who noticed and was comforted by these things? I received a call one morning from my sister, and the first words that she said was, "Our church burned down." I didn't comprehend what she was talking about at first. What church? I personally didn't have a church that I called my church. I did occasionally go to a small church, but it wasn't my church. I had no real connection to that building or its people at the time. I was seeking, not blending in and not becoming a part of anything. Later that day, I felt an urge to take a drive to see for myself the remains of that small church that I did not consider my own. Smoke was still filtering through the rubble. The burnt smell just permeated the air. The entire area was circled with bright yellow caution tape. I left my car and I walked slowly up to what was left of this church. As I stood staring at the smoking pile of bricks that was once a church, something stirred within me. A hint of sadness began to seep through. I didn't understand why I was sad. This wasn't really my church. It was just a building that had always been there. I later learned that this church had been a part of the community for 150 years. I never paid attention as I grew up because I didn't attend it regularly. I remember riding my bicycle past this church when I was younger. I remember walking by it hundreds of times and attending Girl Scout meetings there when I was younger. And as I stood looking at that smoky mess, my thoughts became still. And without thinking about it, I found myself crawling under that yellow caution tape. I walked over and through some of the rubble to get a closer look at some of these bricks. My eyes landed on one brick laying at an angle, partially buried under soot and grime. I reached down and picked it up and held it in my hand. And it was still warm to the touch and smelled heavily of smoke. I crawled back under the tape and returned to my car and drove home with that smoky brick in my car. Once home, I walked the back steps that led into my house, and I set the brick beside the bottom step. I planned to leave it out for a day or two just so I wasn't bringing that smell into the house. And I forgot about it for a while until someone came to visit a few weeks later and asked, "What's that brick doing by your bottom step?" I said, "Oh, that's just from my church that burnt down a few weeks ago." And later, I realized that I had said, "my church," and it didn't feel awkward or wrong at all. Now, years later, that brick still sits by my bottom step. It has weathered each season that has come over the years. Winter comes and it's buried in snow, and I'll usually hit it with my shovel and have to move it back into place. And in the spring, I'll have to place it back into its original spot, tucking it back into the soft earth from all of the rains. In the summer, I'll run into it with my weed eater or my push mower and have to put it back in the same spot again. And fall will come and it will be buried in fall leaves. And I'll continue to tuck it back in place beside that bottom step leading into my house. I'm not sure why I take such care of this brick. After all, it's just a brick from a small town church that burned down years ago. But isn't it funny how your mindset changes when you let God into your life? For several years, that one brick was, in fact, just a brick from a small church that burned down years ago. And now there's a new church built by those who love the old one. I now call that new church my church. I began attending every Sunday. I was baptized and I became a member of that church. The people of the church have become a part of my family and I of theirs. And I've become one of those people who sings out loud with my hands in the air. I've participated in dramas and skits in my church. I've laughed and I've cried in my church. I have felt lost and afraid in my church and have ultimately been found and felt joy in my church. And I finally get what that guy up front is talking about. A small town church that burned down a while back, and one brick. Just a brick to some who may see it sitting near the bottom step that leads into my house. But if you ask me about that brick today, I'll ask you to take a closer look. I'll share the story of a small town church with the most beautiful stained glass windows and how the sun's rays would filter through them to create an amazing visual experience. I'll share how one day that church burnt right down to the ground and how a woman, searching for some answers, visited the rubble, picked up a brick, and brought it home. Some may see just a brick, but to me, that brick now represents a stepping stone. It's my stepping stone to finding my faith and becoming part of a family, finding truth, peace, and above all, knowing that I have received grace. That's my chapter in When Grace Found Me, Volume 3. You can find all 3 of the volumes of When Grace Found Me on Amazon.com. That's the easiest place to find them. You can also learn more about me if you'd like, and the other things that I'm writing and what it is I'm doing with my podcast, Let Fear Bounce, or my television show, The Right Stuff, The Author's Voice, by simply visiting my website, which is my name. It is www.kimlenglingauthor.com. Thank you and have a blessed day.
Thank you again to the amazing author that read us a story. And be sure to check out all the other amazing shows on RB Media. Till next time, bye.